Alrighty, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. While we're waiting for all the participants to hop on the Zoom, if y'all want to put in the chat where y'all are tuning in from, that would be fantastic. I am tuning in from Corpus Christi, Texas, and I'm super excited to be here with you all.
Same here. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh. I am tuning in from Boulder, Colorado, although I'm originally from Georgia. So maybe there might be some people from there in the chat. Got Florida, Tampa. Awesome.
Ooh.
State neighbors.
Lots of Tampa folks here. We'll just give it a few minutes for more people to join. We are super excited to be celebrating World Water Monitoring Day with y'all. It's going to be a great presentation. We'll give it about 1 or 2 more minutes. Alrighty. Yes. Alrighty. While more people are coming in, we just put in the chat where you're tuning in from, but we can go ahead and get started. I am super excited. Hi everyone, my name is Maggie and I am an EarthEcho Youth Leadership Council member and I'm your host for today's webinar called Microplastics, the Big Little Problem in Our Waterways. Thank you so much for joining us today as we kick off our World Water Monitoring Day celebration. This week we will be hosting not one, not two, but 3 virtual events, and we will be presenting opportunities for you to get involved in the EarthEcho Water Challenge. For more information about the Water Challenge, you can visit monitorwater.org. But before we dive into today's very special and exciting webinar, we would first like to introduce EarthEcho International and the purpose of this organization. So EarthEcho International truly envisions a world where every individual from all backgrounds and experiences has the opportunity and tools to create a healthy and thriving environment. And to that end, our mission is to build a global youth movement to prepare and restore our ocean planet. EarthEcho was founded in 2005 by siblings Philippe and Alexandra Cousteau in honor of their father, Philippe Cousteau Sr., the son of the legendary Jacques Cousteau. So here at EarthEcho, we collaborate with youth all over the world to provide knowledge and develop tools that drive meaningful environmental action to protect and restore our ocean planet. So EarthEcho International is a nonprofit organization founded on the belief that young people have the power to change our planet. Our programs and resources have reached over 2 million people in 146 countries. So a few things before we get started. Please do not hesitate to ask any questions in the Q&A feature here on Zoom and any comments in the chat. So please comment like where you're tuning in from. We would love to see how far we are reaching people all over the world for today's very special event. So yeah, we can go ahead and get started with today's very special speaker. We have Josh Soll. He is a research scientist at Ocean First Institute with a focus in fish biology. We are super excited to have him here. And Josh, if you would like to take it away, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Maggie. Yeah, so like Maggie said, I am a research scientist and educator at Ocean First Institute, but my focus is fish biology. However, with that, everything in the environment is connected. And so I've had a lot of hats working with different environmental groups and in different kinds of environments, working with water quality. And that's kind of where the microplastics come in. But as a little bit of a background, my primary focus is with shark biology. So I have done a lot of work understanding how sharks are used as a resource. Unfortunately, we use sharks for their fins and for other parts of the body that we create for products. And one of these was an interesting campaign I was a part of in my previous job at Shark Allies based in California, where we actually learned that this oil taken from shark livers was used in vaccines, basically to make these vaccines more effective. And so we created this huge campaign and made a petition to get companies to stop using this oil from sharks and use alternatives. And we got tons of signatures, and we're seeing some good traction. So really good stuff. Thankfully, none of the COVID vaccines, if you were curious, use the shark oil. So no worries on that front. But just an interesting thing to be aware of. We do use animal products a lot, which is pretty crazy. Some of this other work I've done is scuba diving with sharks. As you see in the top left picture, there's this really cool research called laser photogrammetry, where you can actually measure sharks by shooting these kind of just non-harmful lasers at them, just to measure the distance between the two lasers, so you can get a whole length of the shark and all this other cool stuff. The last one, which is also partly related to the microplastics work, is my work with this little cute fish right here, the northern red-bellied dace. This is a fish species that you can find all across the northern parts of North America. But in Colorado here, where I work, they're also incredibly endangered because of some environmental changes, including pretty destructive flooding. But the northern red-bellied dace, which gets its name because this cute red stomach during mating season, is very endangered, and we worked to raise them and reintroduce them into the wild, and then monitor the waterways we release them in for water quality, and that includes understanding the pH and the temperature and the chemistry of the water, but also if microplastics are there, how can these microplastics, which we'll talk about in a second, how can they influence life in these waterways? So enough about me. I want to keep going, talk about the topic for today, microplastics, which is a really, really fascinating and very relevant topic. And again, please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I'm absolutely happy to answer them. All right, plastic pollution. So I want to discuss with plastic pollution where plastic comes from, what it is, why we use it so much, and the threats that it could face. And in addition to this, I want to talk about some solutions to this issue, some things that we can do, whether it's at an individual level or at a larger scale, because this is an issue, and it does affect our environment. And also this, microplastics in general, how we talk about it can affect the environment. It can be kind of a daunting, frustrating thing. So I want to end it off with, the positive note, solutions, things we can do, things that are already being done. Okay, so with that note, plastics. Plastics are really interesting. They come from oil, which is, a natural part of Earth. But when the oil is collected, the kind of chemical, the molecular structure is manipulated in a way that makes these things unrecognizable by the Earth. So, if you take this plastic and try to compost it, you bury it in the ground, it's not going to break down. It's not going to kind of decompose and turn back into the Earth, which is pretty interesting because, it's originally made from oil, which isn't necessarily, something that's fully breakdownable either. However, it's more natural than plastic, but it's a good note to say that plastic comes from oil. So with the way that we kind of create plastic from oil, we can create it in a whole variety of ways. We can make plastic more durable, more stretchy. We can make it to, construct things like PVC, number 3 right here. There's a whole lot of uses for plastic, and we can manipulate plastic in a way that it can serve any kind of purpose you could think of. We see them in hospitals and IV bags, all the way to, polymer, crazy materials on the outside of space shuttles. So they're very diverse, and they do have good uses. For example, IV bags in hospitals, we need we need something sterile, something that we don't reuse to protect the health of people. And so, plastics can be really good, but they can also be bad. And so with this is really just to show that there are 7 main kinds of plastics. So if you've looked at any kind of plastic item you have, you may see a little number, which really just represents the kind of plastic it is. And the kind of plastic is just really, what the function of the plastic is. So, PVC, we know, is used a lot in building things, whatever that may be. If you're, building, pipes for water flow, or, building something, really crazy, which I'll show you later. We actually had to use PVC for to process microplastics. Again, these triangles are a little misleading. So, we think a lot about these triangles, I think, as reduce, reuse, recycle, and these plastics can't necessarily be recycled. So some of them, like number 1, peat or PET, are pretty easily recyclable, but a lot of them aren't. And so it's a little misleading when you see something like number 7, which has crazy things like acrylic paint. You can't exactly recycle that very well. So, it's a little misleading in that sense. In addition to that, when you recycle these plastics, you're not just using it infinitely. You're not, melting it down and building into something else. You actually have to create new plastic to input into the old plastic to make it reusable, to make it durable again. So it kind of like facilitates the cycle of the continuing production of plastic. So really, the best thing in the kind of reduce, reuse, recycle is to reduce, and we'll talk about things you can do to reduce your impact, or even use alternatives. Now, one more thing I want to add on this slide is that it does take a very long time under perfect conditions to break down plastic. And that doesn't necessarily mean decompose like compost, like I said. It actually can just mean, break it into smaller pieces. And that's where microplastics come about. So under the perfect conditions, we have this really crazy spread of, it could take 5 to 10 years for plastic to break down, to some plastic, 1,000 years to never, will never break down. And, so under these perfect conditions, meaning, intense heat, intense light, and weathering, you can think of like waves crashing against rocks, kind of breaking things down. We could theoretically have, these plastics breaking down into their elements, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, things that are found in oil, to make them kind of put back into the environment. But this is usually unlikely. So usually they just kind of hang around. So with that, just to start, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned how, under these perfect conditions, they break down into smaller pieces, and this is like where microplastics come into play.
Mhm.
How small can these microplastics get?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So microplastics themselves are defined as plastics that are 5 millimeters in length or less, and I'll show you guys a picture of microplastics later. They're really just small pieces of plastic that are, from a larger product. Say like a plastic food container, and then it crumbles down, and there's tons of small, tiny pieces. So 5 millimeters is like the definition of microplastic, but it can get incredibly, incredibly smaller. Some of you may have heard recently that we found microplastics in human blood or in our lungs. And these are microplastics that are really kind of defined as nanoplastics, which are incredibly small, naked to the, or invisible to the, to the eye. And so these are tiny, tiny. A microscope has a hard time seeing them. You have to have a really high power. And this allows the microplastics, the nanoplastics, to really kind of float around in water and air. Yeah, so they can get incredibly small. They don't stop at 5 millimeters. They break down much further. Alrighty. Great question. All right, so moving on. I just wanted to kind of touch on the journey of plastics in general. We don't often kind of think about the entire life cycle of plastic. Plastic has a life in a kind of sense. Plastic, as I said, comes from oil, and it is turned into a whole variety of products. And it's almost unavoidable in everyday life. This is a perfect example of plastic containers in grocery stores. They're really, really great for holding things, for storing things in kind of a sterile way, because they just in themselves can be sterile. And typically they're they're single use, meaning that you use them once, you'll eat the fruit that's in these containers and you throw it away, you recycle it. And so, it doesn't really get the chance to kind of be contaminated over time. So you could probably think of any single place you've gone to in your life, any kind of store, any environment, and you've probably interacted with plastic, and that's just kind of the system that we're a part of. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't change it and work towards some solutions. Okay, so as this plastic travels, it goes to our stores, our grocery stores, for example. We'll purchase the products and we pick them up, carry them home. Plastic bags are a perfect example. Very, very useful in carrying things and holding things. And when we're done with them, oftentimes we will dispose of them. That can be in the form of trashing them, throwing them away, or recycling. However, a lot of times the plastics will also just end up in the environment. People don't necessarily, all people don't necessarily have the best practices in managing their trash, and so plastic can end up in the environment and waterways. Unfortunately, you see a lot of pollution in the ocean because people are just on their boats throwing trash in the ocean, which is really sad. But a lot of it comes from a lack of understanding about the fact that plastic is an issue, and the oil companies and companies that produce plastic are kind of part of that, because they don't really want you to know that these are an issue. They want you to keep using the plastic because it benefits them. But this doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And lastly, on this slide, like I said, plastic doesn't really decompose, it just gets smaller, and that's microplastics. And so we'll kind of start like we are at a broader scale, and we'll narrow it down. Alrighty, so this is interesting. This is a graph. This is data from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, regarding how in the US only we manage our plastics. So if you look at this graph, this dot right here, this whole line, so this is 2018, how much plastics we've managed. So it kind of equates to how much plastic we've used in this year. Now, a majority of it, you can see, this is 27 million tons of plastic. This is how much is actually landfilled, how much is thrown into the environment, in these big landfills, kind of these areas sectioned off just for waste disposal. Now, a much smaller portion of that is recycled. So this is, probably 3 or so million tons of plastic that are recycled. And then this lighter blue section is the amount of plastic that is combusted with energy recovery. This means that, because plastic is made from oil, you can actually burn it in a way that you can get some energy back to use for other things. However, if you're burning it, it doesn't necessarily, eliminate it from the environment, because you're just turning it into fumes, which is not really great. But this is a great example of how much plastic we use. So in 2018, we managed about 37 million tons of plastic. This is just in the US alone. So if you think about this on a global scale, it can be a lot larger than this. Not only that, but it compounds over time. So all of this space in the graph is actually how much plastic we use over time. And because plastic doesn't really break down and decompose, all this plastic is likely still in existence, which is, just insane. So it's just something really interesting to be aware of, that, it doesn't break down. We use a lot of it, and all of this plastic from 1960 until now is still here. So just a really, really interesting fact. Alrighty. Any questions on that part so far? Let's see, I'll check the chat. It's like no questions so far, so we're good.
I will say, for those of y'all who, I know we have some new folks here in the Zoom, please do not be afraid to add any questions that you have for Josh in the Q&A tab. And then also put where you're from. Me and Josh would love to know who's in this Zoom with us. So yeah, if y'all have any questions, please ask Josh.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, so plastic pollution, where does it go? This is interesting. I'm sure, most of you would probably say plastic is everywhere, and this is true. We do find plastic everywhere, but I wanted to give some specific examples. Some of them were surprising to me when I first was getting into this field, understanding what's going on here. So as I'm sure you know, plastics are in our waterways, and waterways are very highly connected. In Colorado, which I saw one of you is from Denver, in Colorado, we're a headwater state, and this means that water starts here and in the mountains, and it flows out of state. And so, the same water that starts here might end up in Mississippi, or it might end up in the Gulf of Mexico. And so we're really highly connected. And that means that the pollution is also very connected, because it can start here and it can go anywhere else. So we have plastic pollution in our waterways, which is really unfortunate. Things, ocean, creeks, streams, rivers, lakes, even in the water cycle, think the water cycle, so that's part of it. It is in our air as well. So microplastics, yes, but also nanoplastics, which are, very, very light, are able to kind of get swept up, picked up by the wind, end up in the atmosphere. In addition to this, they can even get picked up with evaporating water and, be rained down in other places. The water cycle allows for, the transfer of water to different areas. And this means that we are also moving plastic into new environments that maybe we didn't think, was possible. And lastly, onto land. I'm sure, you've probably all been to a park before and seen trash just sitting around, maybe right next to the trash can even. I've seen that a lot, which is unfortunate, frustrating even. And, even in our national parks, we see trash, we see plastic. An interesting fact about all of this, though, with kind of the connectivity of our Earth, these plastics, these microplastics, have been found and documented in Arctic ice, which is somewhere that is completely, very far away, very cold, harsh environment. There's only a select, there's select communities that actually live there. But there's a ton of plastic that is just found in this Arctic ice where, very few people live. So it's really interesting how far this plastic can reach. Another interesting one is from one of my coworkers. One of my coworkers is a deep sea biologist. And he knows someone who mans submersibles down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. And there are certain parts in the Marianas Trench now that you can't get through because there's so much trash. So it even really can hinder your research or, our understanding of certain environments, which is absolutely insane. Yeah. Yeah. We do eat, drink, and breathe the plastic, and we'll talk about that. It's pretty crazy. Alrighty. Watershed. So this is a really important component of this issue. And so I want to touch on this. Now, if anyone wants to put in the chat, can anybody give me like a very brief, maybe like a couple word definition of what a watershed might be? I'll give you like maybe 30 seconds to type something in if you got it. Or Maggie's welcome to contribute as well, of course. So it does have to do with water. It's in the name.
Ooh. Someone says an area of land that leads to a body of water.
100%. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so so a watershed, which is really my definition here. A watershed is any area of land that drains into a body of water. And so with this definition, all land is part of a watershed at least. And it's cool because watersheds can occur at different scales. So you can have, a watershed that's a tiny pond. So think, maybe this little waterway right here, this pond. The area around it is a watershed to that pond. So water that falls in this area drains into that. But then we can think of this entire area with the dashed black lines as one other larger watershed. So it's kind of like a watershedception, if you will, of watersheds, which is really fascinating because they can be at different scales. And a good example of this is the Mississippi River watershed, which spans 33 different states. So it's huge. It's very massive. But if you kind of zoom in, if you imagine you're like a map and you zoom in further through that, you'll see much smaller watersheds within that as well. But this is important because it leads the connectivity of our water, of the movement of our water, as well as anything that's in it. This can be life, this can be fish and plants and organisms, but it can also be pollution. So, trash, plastic, microplastics can move through watersheds and drain into other areas. So it's not only that we're necessarily polluting the waterways themselves, directly by throwing things into it, but we can even throw trash, on a highway, for example, and it could end up in a waterway. Alrighty. So now we kind of hone into microplastics, and this is where I told you that I would show you what they look like. So on the left here, we have kind of just a sample of a whole variety of microplastics. Some of these are fibers. So this like black line is a fiber coming from clothing. So a lot of times, you think of your stretchy clothing, your dry fit, or the different kinds of really good moisture wicking material. This is what we see in washing machines. These materials, these fibers can break off of the clothing and enter the waterways. So those are microplastics. And then we also have fragments, which are kind of like these little chunky things that come from more solid pieces of plastic. And again, a microplastic is anything that is 5 millimeters in length or less. So all of these are microplastics. But you could even have maybe like a tiny little dot you wouldn't even see on here that is also a microplastic, or more specifically a nanoplastic. So they can get incredibly small. And because of this, they enter our environment really easily, and they can attach onto things. They can be, consumed really easily. So this picture on the top right is a marine worm. And all these little specks that you see on the head of the worm are microplastics. So they're just kind of, able to be collected onto, the surface of an organism. And which we'll talk about in a second, we find them in our environment all the way from, giant piece of plastic to the microplastics. And if you're a fish, for example, swimming in this environment, you can't really avoid it. You'll breathe it in, you'll swallow it if you're eating something. And unfortunately, species have even made habitats out of the floating plastic in the ocean because it gives them shelter, which is, the shelter is a good part, because, if you're a fish and you don't want to get eaten by somebody else, then, the shelter is good to hide. But we don't really want it to be an unnatural thing. And so plastic is not really the best habitat for them. So on to kind of what I was showing before, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This is a huge phenomenon and a huge issue. So there are these things called gyres, which are these big ocean currents, kind of driven by temperatures, different cold and warm waters that kind of move each other, as well as winds and the circulation of global wind patterns that creates this zone in the Pacific, all the way from California to East Asia to Japan. That is kind of like a toilet bowl. Like, it swirls in a big circle, and everything that comes in contact with this circle gets trapped inside of it. And so we have this really interesting idea of, actually, the garbage patch is two separate patches, these two big patches that are connected by kind of like sporadic, sparse patches of more trash. And these are huge. I mean, if you look at just this, which is, this is kind of like a diagram was created, but for you to look on a map and see, the size of it, it is insanely huge. It's more than twice the size of Texas now. It's absolutely massive. And this is the ocean, so things live here. This is a perfect example. We have sea turtles and manta rays, which are absolutely beautiful creatures, and this is their habitat. They live in it. So does anybody know what a sea turtle eats? Oh, I guess some sea turtles, not all of them eat this, but any guesses as to what sea turtles eat? And maybe what they might mistake as their food?
I'm gonna guess, if no one has a guess. In that picture, it looks like a little jellyfish.
Yeah, absolutely. And jellyfish is one of the big things. A plastic bag to a sea turtle may look like a jellyfish, and even to us in this picture, a plastic bag really does look like a jellyfish, and sea turtles love them. And so already, we're seeing that they can eat those, and it's really not good for them, for their health, for the digestive system. And then kind of in addition to this, we have other species like the manta ray, which is a filter feeder. They basically filter water over their mouth into their gills and kind of process what's in there. And so they can't even really avoid eating plastics, because the food they eat is just as small as the plastics themselves, which is pretty crazy. Now, one more thing to add here is that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the patch itself is kind of like a misnomer. It's kind of not exactly an accurate name, because it's not just floating on the surface. It's all down the water column to the bottom of the ocean. And this is because plastics already have different densities, and so some of them can kind of sink down, but over time they actually take on things like chemicals and bacteria and heavy metals, really, not super great things onto their surfaces, which makes them increase in density and they sink. And so, it's not really an easy undertaking to clean this up. We can definitely scoop up a lot of that's on the surface, but we're gonna have a hard time getting it out of the water column itself. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting phenomenon. And with this, this is all coming from other places. This, some of this is probably from a direct input. People are throwing it in the ocean right there, but 70% of the plastics, the trash that enters the ocean comes from inland. It comes from landlocked states and places that are not directly connected to the ocean. In addition to this, a lot of the plastic of this garbage patch specifically is discarded fishing gear. About 40% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch itself is fishing gear. So things like fishing nets, fishing line, other kinds of traps and gear and floating material, which are typically synthetic or made out of plastic. So even if we were just to address kind of the sustainability of fishing, of fishing equipment alone, we could really drastically reduce, our impact on the environment. Alrighty, so I know this is a lot of information, so I'm gonna give a second. Does anybody have any questions here?
This isn't really a question, but maybe like a little comment. So I had a friend who went to the island of Palau, which is, I don't know if it's like on the map, but maybe on like the left side of the map. And after getting back from Palau, they talked about how they, on that small island, they do not use like single-use plastics or whatnot, but they still have all these huge waves of single-use plastic and just so much trash coming up onto their island. And so that kind of puts it into perspective about how so many of these islands that you see on the map, they're not really contributing to this crisis, but they are bearing the brunt. Their island is bearing the brunt of this crisis, which I don't know. It just kind of puts it into perspective about this problem. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it also shows, the connectivity of this issue. It's even if you're not the one, polluting or creating the issue, you're going to be impacted by it. It's because we're all connected through our waterways, through just being present on Earth. Anywhere you're really connected, which is really cool, but also can be frustrating when we're dealing with these kinds of issues. Alrighty. So ocean pollution conservation work. This is really awesome. So there are tons of organizations, including EarthEcho, which I should have put EarthEcho on here, but I have some other organizations as well on here that are cool. And there are many, many, many more. There's lots of work being done on kind of like the conservation side. So here's some examples. So Save the Med and BraceNet are actually pretty similar. They're both organizations that have scuba divers that will go into the ocean and remove discarded fishing gear, which is a huge issue. Like I said, it's 40% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So, it's a huge impact on the environment. And, even if the fishing gear itself is not being used by, fishing boats, it can still serve its purpose, unfortunately. A net can entangle a sea turtle, for example, and that's really frustrating. So these organizations will work to kind of let these species loose that might be trapped in the fishing gear, but they also remove them from the ocean. And BraceNet specifically, which is cool, will actually what's called upcycle the fishing gear they take. So, of course, like I discussed, we can't exactly get rid of this plastic. We can't compost it. We can't really just, completely erase it from existence. And so to reuse it is something that is better than just throwing it away. So BraceNet will take this fishing gear and they'll turn it into bracelets, keychains, dog leashes and collars, a whole variety of things, which is really cool because then it gives the nets another purpose instead of them being present in the ocean and potentially harming wildlife. 4Ocean is another good example. This is a for-profit company that was started with the goal of picking up trash, picking up plastic, and they sell bracelets, and a small portion of every bracelet goes to trash collection, and they have picked up tons and tons of pounds of plastic and trash from the ocean, which is really important. You know, I think the one of the bigger things we can do, and I'll talk about this in a second again, is to really cut off the source of this pollution. So, you know, making sure that we're not throwing it into the environment, and that way we can address what's already there. But this is really important work because, you know, this plastic, this trash is still present in the environment. It can harm species, and so by cleaning it up, you know, you're doing a really, really big thing. And so these are just some good examples. Kind of on the brighter side, you know, this is the good stuff that's going on. On the research side, I thought this was a really cool study. We have wastewater treatment plants, and wastewater treatment plants are, you know, really ubiquitous. They're found everywhere, essentially. Anywhere there's a lot of human influence. So, you know, we'll put things into our waterways. You can think of, you know, we're washing our dishes and we're rinsing away all the stuff, the particles from our dishes, or, you know, we're washing our clothes in the washing machine, and a lot of this gets drained into our waterways, like our creeks, our streams, our rivers. And so along these waterways, there are treatment plants that try to filter out as much pollution as they possibly can. However, these treatment plants don't necessarily have the resources or know how to filter out microplastics, and microplastics can be a big issue. You know, they can not only be harmful just in themselves, but they can also, you know, bring chemicals and heavy metals and bad things with them. And so if you can filter this out, it's better for human health and for the health of the environment. And so this research study actually found a way to filter out microplastics in a wastewater treatment plant by creating a membrane that was able to filter this out. And it had a very, very high success rate. So this is a really good example of a way that we can, you know, implement and you know, remove some of the plastic pollution from the environment, which is, you know, really, really amazing. Alrighty, before I start with how you can help, any questions so far? Give you a few more seconds if anybody has anything.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, my mind is like not wrapping around how, like, you were talking about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and how it's twice the size of Texas. I'm from Texas. I'm here in Texas. It's a very big state. We always say everything's bigger in Texas. So the fact that you said it's twice as big as Texas just blows my mind. And then also how talking about how plastic can end up in places that we never even imagined. And you mentioned how there was a recent study about how microplastics were found in human blood. And
Mhm.
so how that just blows my mind. How does that get into our bloodstream, like plastics?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, unfortunately, plastics can enter our body through a whole variety of ways. Some of them can be direct. So, you know, when we're talking about microplastics and nanoplastics, and they can be swept up in the air, you know, we can just breathe them in, which is unfortunate. We can just inhale and have them kind of go into our lungs. Another way is through our water. So, you know, if we're not drinking perfectly filtered water, or even, you know, for example, drinking from, you know, like a plastic water bottle, a single-use plastic water bottle. If that water bottle, which it usually will, kind of sits in a warehouse or sits in the sun, it will break down over time, and so you might be, you know, you could be drinking some plastics from that. Um, so that's another way. So we already have, which is really crazy and kind of freaky to me. You already have, through those two examples, plastics in your lungs and in your digestive system. But then you can also get it in through your food, which is part of the digestive system too. So, you know, we have plastics, like I discussed, kind of affecting our amazing species in on Earth. And if, you know, if they're breathing in, if they're eating, swallowing these plastics, they're very likely, if they're, you know, if they're food we eat, like fish, for example, if they're food we eat, you know, they're likely to be transferred from them to us if we eat them. And so that's not to say you shouldn't eat those things, but we should really just kind of address the issue on that. Now, with all of this together, you know, we're breathing into our lungs, we're getting into our digestive system. If we get plastics that are really small enough, like nanoplastics, they can go across cells and therefore get into our bloodstream. So they can cross barriers, be kind of transported into our bloodstreams because they're that tiny. And so that's where we're seeing from the research, we're finding it in our blood, and scientists are even finding it in the blood of other organisms. I think there was actually some recent research that found it in shark blood, which is kind of makes sense because it's in the ocean, and they're top predators, but it's everywhere, and there's tons of different ways, like I mentioned, that it can enter our bodies. All right, let's see. Okay, so yeah, so I'll of course leave room for questions at the end as well, but how you can help, because there are a million ways you can help, and it's really great. Even making one small change or doing one small thing, it all makes an impact. Now I want to preface this by saying, if we were to change our systems, if we were to get the government to pass laws to to ban plastics or to use more sustainable alternatives, that might make the change more quickly. Um, and that might also make some of you think that, your actions alone as an individual don't really make an impact. But that's not true. Yes, we will see larger impacts more quick, larger scale impacts, in reducing our plastic use, if we do these bigger changes, but it starts at the individual level. It starts in our demand, supply and demand, economics of choosing what we use, and that really can change the behaviors of companies and what they produce. But along with behaviors, is also just the behavior of using something other than plastic. If you start using something other than plastic and bring it to your family, your friends, you can really grow that in your communities and start to make a larger impact. It really just takes one person, and that's the beauty of it. So to start, I just have some products on the top that are good examples of things in your everyday life that you might use that are good alternatives to plastic. So for example, there's this huge trend going now of the use of and the creation of these toothpaste tablets. So instead of toothpaste coming in plastic bottles or tubes that you can't recycle, you have these kind of like single piece chewable tablets that are toothpaste, and that come in glass jars that you can refill, and that use no plastic at all. So one really good thing that we do pretty much every day, that can already eliminate your use of plastic. Another one I really like is laundry sheets. So many companies are making these things called laundry sheets that are kind of like a solid sheet of soap that you throw in your laundry machine and your washing machine, and it dissolves really easily, and it does a really good job. Not only is this not using plastic, it comes in a biodegradable package instead of a bottle, but it also saves you money. So if you think about, going to the store and buying a big bottle of laundry detergent, of liquid detergent, a lot of that is water, and so you're paying for the water itself as well as the soap. And so this really makes it more cost effective because you're buying just the soap. And there's tons of sheets in these, and they last quite a while, which is awesome. All right, the next one, which is huge, is we all have to drink water, and so using a reusable water bottle, even if it's plastic, is better than using a single-use water bottle. So if you think about how many bottles how much water you might drink a day, let's say for example, on the smaller side, if you were to drink one water bottle a day, that could be 365 bottles a year, and that's a lot. If you think about a pile of 365 bottles, plastic bottles, that's quite a bit. And so if you multiply that by the entire population of the world, or of maybe the US, it's pretty insane. So just by using a reusable water bottle that you can refill, you can clean it out, you don't have to throw it away, you can make a huge impact. You can already reduce the amount of plastic you use. I had a hard time getting my family into kind of being more sustainable, and this is where I started. I started by buying them some cool water bottles, and there's some crazy ones out there you can get customized and whatnot, and I did that. I was a little extra, but they're really great. They're a really good way to get people into more sustainable practices, even if they're not really sure about changing their behaviors. So if you want a place to start, water bottles are a really good place to start. Lastly, we have reusable produce bags. I love these, especially because where I grew up in Georgia, we don't really have a very strong sense of sustainability in a lot of our stores. And so I would, as a kid, go into these stores, and I would pull off a bunch of plastic bags from the roll, fill it up with, apples and green beans and broccoli and whatnot. And then as soon as I was done with it, I would just throw it away. I didn't really think about it. But with these, we have these reusable bags that are, some of them are see-through, some of them are not, but they're very lightweight, and they're made of some kind of cloth or cotton. And so you can reuse them forever. And because it's so light, it doesn't really affect the weight of the whole bag, and so it won't really affect the price. So another really good alternative, and you can find these everywhere. You can find them all over the place, on online stores, in person, depending where you go. So really great. Now, just to get some more participation from you guys, I want to keep the gears spinning. Could you think of, so we talked about individual levels of things we can do, but I gave an example of laws we can pass, but can any of you think of any other examples of things that can be done at like a larger scale, to kind of reduce or even eliminate this issue? Just a few words in the chat, maybe. Absolutely. Bag fees. I like that. Yeah. So Colorado.
Bag fees.
Yeah. So Donnie, yeah, I think you're familiar with this because you're from Denver. I think you mentioned, in Colorado, we actually, I think, charge a certain amount, maybe like a quarter or a nickel, something like that, for each plastic bag we use in grocery stores. And so this can kind of like disincentivize people from using plastic bags, and instead it makes them, or motivates them to use reusable bags, which is really great. Yeah, so that's a really great example. Porsche also has a really great one, awareness campaign. So awareness campaigns and using social media, using your voice, your platform, is incredible, because you can have a very large reach with that. Using your voice, it's really important, and spreading awareness. It's all about education. I mean, if you don't know about an issue, how can you care about it? And so just educating others is great. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So so this is another good one. Just with bag fees, some stores even give you money back when you bring your own. So again, like an incentive to use your own bags, which, especially, money is a very important thing in our society. And so money can be a really strong motivator. And so it's really good when you can use that in a way to reduce your impact. Alrighty. I like that. Any other ones before I continue? Well, I really kind of will continue on the question, so maybe I'll just move forward. But
there's also on a larger, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was gonna say, on an even larger scale, there's legislation in the Biden administration that eliminates single-use plastics on federal land. So that's also really exciting.
Yes, which is incredible. Yeah, that is awesome. So laws, legislation, I mean, these are, large scale changes that can really impact our use. Because if you think about it, if you go to a grocery store and you see, let's say you want to go and buy a bag of chips, would you really care if the bag of chips was in a plastic bag versus, a recyclable paper bag or a compostable bag? I mean, we're not really buying the product for the container, we're buying it for what's in it. And so, as much as we're subject to the system we live in, we're a part of, with plastics, we don't necessarily need or desire plastic all the time. So there's some changes that can be made, and we won't necessarily be unhappy about the changes. We just need to kind of implement them. Alrighty. So this is just kind of part of some of the work that I've done. This is part of the microplastics project I do here at Ocean First Institute, working with schools along the Front Range of Colorado. It's a really awesome mountain range in Colorado. When you process the samples, when you're taking samples from the environment and trying to isolate microplastics to see, what's there, if they're there or not, it can be difficult. So water samples are pretty easy, but if you're scooping up sediment from the bottom of a waterway, and you want to kind of filter it out and try to get the microplastics, you have to go through kind of a larger process. And so I built these called density separators that are a big PVC tube. So plastic, of course, not great, but they're reusable, and we'll use them for a lot of projects. They create this kind of suspension where you put in your sediment sample. So this thing in the middle is a little PVC basket that you drop in your sediment. You pump water through it, get it all mixing up. and then you add salt, and so the salt will kind of change the density of the water and allow things to flow to the top. And that way, with this kind of little angled opening, you can collect what comes off of it. And so this is just a really cool way, that we found to isolate microplastics. And so if you ever get into, this kind of research, you get into this kind of science, you might be doing things like this, which is really awesome. Alrighty. And then this is some of the work we've done. So in addition to processing samples, you also analyze them. And so it's pretty straightforward. Once you process them, you kind of put them onto a filter, which is a little hard to see, but these are our little cool filtering contraptions here. We put them onto little filters, and then we'll put them under microscopes and analyze them. We'll look under the microscope and count for microplastics. And so with this, these are some things you will see, which these are some interesting things we found. So on the left here, we're not entirely sure what this is, but it is clear that it's some kind of plastic fiber. It almost looks like a spring, which is interesting because it's so tiny. It would be impossible that it was a spring, but incredibly small. And so you can almost tell under the microscope that this is not really natural. This is a little strange. So that's one. This is really tiny. Again, here, this is another thing we weren't really able to identify. It is most likely synthetic, the way that it's designed. But this is tiny. This is like a tiny little, sphere or something that broke open. I was almost thinking maybe it was part of one of those like silica gel packets that has the tiny little beads in it, which sometimes can contain, plastic pieces. And so this may be one of those, but it is pretty small. So we're not entirely sure, but it is clearly, synthetic. And this is another good example. These are synthetic fibers that come from fabric, usually clothing, but they can come from a whole variety of sources. And it's red, so it's pretty obvious that it's it's a microplastic. So oftentimes you'll see under the microscope these crazy bright colors that are pretty obviously something that's not natural. But we do often also see microplastics that are maybe green or brown. And with the waterways we sample, it might not be very easy to distinguish whether or not they're actually natural or not. So we have all these really crazy tests, like heating up a little needle and poking it and see what happens to the item in question, and all kinds of really other cool tests that are ways you can determine whether or not they're natural. So with that, I hope this kind of gives you a general idea of what's going on with microplastics. Know that this is a huge issue, a huge undertaking to even kind of start to reduce our impact on the environment. There is a lot of work that's being done and a lot of work that will be done to reduce this impact. And even just by listening to me and learning about these plastics today, you're already making a difference, because you can take this knowledge and teach it to other people. You can spread awareness, you can use your voice to talk about these issues, advocate, and make a difference. You're already making a difference, which is awesome. So with that, this is my email right here. You're absolutely welcome to shoot me an email if you have more questions, or if you are interested in learning more about the ocean or ocean science. And so I will turn off my share and bring it back to our questions. So does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer anything you have.
I will say one thing that I was thinking about doing your presentation while people are generating their questions, especially in this society where we live, where we rely so much on plastics, especially single-use plastics. This problem can seem very overwhelming at times. I know sometimes I just feel super guilty when I'm using all these single-use plastics or whatnot, that just like sometimes can't be avoided. And so I get those feelings of, being overwhelmed or whatnot. But I will say, like you were talking about, this is a big undertaking, and so we need as much help as we can get. So every little thing that we do, whether that's, bringing a reusable bag to the grocery store. Or I loved the story that you were saying, Josh, about the water bottles with your families. I don't have my water bottle with me right now, but I have a big water bottle with all the stickers, and people will see it and they're like, oh my gosh, wait, I want to get a water bottle so I can put my stickers on it. Like, that's so cute.
Yeah.
And so just those little things can inspire other people, but also, like you were saying, we also need systemic changes. Like, this can't all fall on us. Um, and so also, we're celebrating World Water Monitoring Day, but it's also National Register to Vote Day. So if register to vote and elect locally elected officials who will prioritize like pieces of legislation to help combat this plastic problem. And I know some of y'all on here might not be old enough to vote. That's okay. You can still advocate for these issues and inspire others. We don't need a few perfect environmentalists. We just need a lot of imperfect environmentalists, and that's going to make a big changes. But let's see if we have any questions. That was just my little 2 cents. But if we don't have any questions, this is the last chance. I'll give people a few more seconds.
Anything about plastics, from the bigger products to the micro, the small, anything you can think of, you're welcome to ask.
I think my brain is still processing like the fact that plastic can be so small. They can just move like through our body and into our blood. That's so insane that I'm still processing that.
Yeah,
But
it's crazy. There's actually this interesting statistic, which I think has changed a little bit, but scientists have kind of estimated that we may consume or may eat a credit card's worth of plastic every month or so, which is a little
that's
freaky.
insane.
It puts it into material size, which is crazy. But also by moving to these alternatives, you can also reduce how much you consume. So if you're using a metal water bottle instead of a plastic one, you'll start already reducing your impact and how much you'll consume yourself, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat. So Josh, thank you so much. I know I really enjoyed today's presentation.
Of course.
And thank you to everyone for your participation in today's event and helping EarthEcho celebrate World Water Monitoring Day for today's virtual event, Monitoring Water Together. And we would love for you to join us tomorrow, September 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the Solving Water Together Careers That Make a Splash webinar. So with that concludes today's event. Thank you so much to everyone for participating. Make sure you follow EarthEcho and stay up to date on everything we're doing, not only when it comes to monitoring water, but everything else that we're doing with youth engagement and ocean climate policy, just different things like that. So and don't hesitate to reach out to Josh. I know Josh included his contact in there as well. But yeah, thank you all so much. And we hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. And we hope to see you tomorrow for our next event. And thank you, Josh, for adding your contact in the chat. Thank you, everybody.
Of course, Akshay. Thanks, everybody.
Y'all have a good one.